We have one last sermon in this series that we've been running through this Christmas season about home for the holidays, and this is called Home by Another Way. I don't know about your plans for your future, but mine have always gone astray. Mine have always gone down different paths than I thought they would. When I was junior high, beginning senior high, I thought I would be an architect, and that didn't work out. And then I thought, I'll become a youth pastor, and God said, let's go this direction. And then I thought, I'll just stay at this church in Washington for the rest of my life. And then God said, no, let's go to a different direction. Everybody's life goes down another path. Whether it's your jobs, or whether it's your family, or whether it's your health, God is always leading us home by another way. I think that's a nice way of saying that. It's never the way we expected, never the way that we had planned, but God is always bringing us home. He's always on the way of getting us to where we belong. And I think that today's section has an interesting way of saying that. Now, in chapter 1, Matthew provided a kind of a homey kind of expression. He doesn't mention the stable. He doesn't mention any of the struggles that they went through. It's just this homey view of Jesus' birth. And it's all nice and planned. It's all nice and scheduled. It's all nice in the way it should be. None of the real strange parts of that birth were mentioned in Matthew chapter 1. But then in chapter 2, we go from that very homey setting, that very intimate setting of Mary and Joseph and the baby, and it spreads out to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Israel, to the uttermost parts of the world, as God takes us down a different path than we thought he might. This impacts our lesson right from the start, because the things that happened to us, to them, impacted the world, and the things that happened to us also impact the world. And as God takes us by another way home, he is impacting all kinds of people on the way that we never even thought about, that we would never have even thought about in our wildest imaginations. We have here in this story a double focus on the Magi and on Herod. What happens to us, what happens to them, what happens to us will cause both joy and grief. It'll cause joy to the Magi, it'll cause grief to Herod. And those are the two poles of people that respond to Jesus. Are we going to be more like the Magi and let God guide us down various strange paths, or are we going to be like Herod and react when God brings something into our world, react rather violently and badly when God brings something into our world? Various people are going to be affected for good or ill by what happens to us as well. People are going to come to know Christ, or they're going to be driven away from Christ because of what we do and what we say and what happens to us. And we need to be careful about that. Now, some people are going to react badly no matter what we do. But we want to be the kind of witness that people will look at and say, that's who I want to follow, even if they don't. It says in verse 1, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, this sets the stage for us. It was kind of odd to me. Every time I read these stories, there's always something new. And what I thought was odd about this was that the location, Bethlehem, and the timing during King Herod's reign are not mentioned in chapter 1. It's just they had a baby, and it's all good, and there were these visions and these dreams and these things that were happening. But there's nothing left, there's nothing said about Bethlehem, there's nothing said about Herod. Matthew leaves that for this point in his story. He makes no mention of how they came to be in Bethlehem. We have to read Luke to figure out that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world would be taxed, and Joseph, being from the tribe and lineage of David, went down to Bethlehem. Matthew mentions nothing of that. He does say that it happened in Bethlehem, it happened in Judea, and it happened during the time of King Herod. I think he mentions Bethlehem at this point so that we can be sure later on when the scribes and the Pharisees say, oh yeah, the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, that they were right, that this is going to happen. And Matthew is saying that, yeah, see, it all occurred just the way God had planned. This baby had to be born in Bethlehem. Herod, I think, is mentioned so that we understand this horrible person and his part in the story that's going to come up later. And so Matthew is setting the stage here and preparing us for the idea that the ways that he is going to take us are sometimes good and sometimes bad, but that they always lead us home. Larger events are at play. And just by mentioning Bethlehem, just by mentioning Herod, we are already prepared for that. Now, Herod was both impressive and tyrannical. He was impressive. He reigned a long time. He had great connections. He did a lot for the country. He had impressive building projects. The temple was one of the wonders of the ancient world, but he was also a monster. And you didn't want to be related to Herod. I think one of the Caesars said that it was better to be Herod's dog than Herod's son, because he killed off his family members, he killed off his wives, he killed off anybody he thought was a threat to him. He was a horrible person, and not a nice person at all. On the other hand, we have the Magi. Now, the Magi were a group of people who had both skill and knowledge. Now, we're not terribly impressed by their skill or their knowledge, because most of it had to do with things that the Bible forbids. They were into astrology, not only following the stars, but figuring out how the stars affected our world and how they would dictate to us how this world was supposed to work. But they did have knowledge and ability and were respected throughout the Middle East, outside of Israel. And it's interesting to me, again, something I learned in studying for this, that they received their knowledge through the understanding that they had. They were astrologers, something that God doesn't approve of. But they received this message from God through a star. He starts where they're at. He takes them from the point where they exist, and he takes us from the point where we exist as well. He doesn't expect us to be perfect the moment we start this journey towards God. He doesn't expect us to be perfect, before we start meeting Jesus Christ. And he meets us in those places. He spoke to them through a star, even though they were using stars in ways that God never intended them to. And Matthew says, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Now, King of the Jews is not a phrase that Jewish people would use. It was a phrase that non-Jews used. And so these people were coming from the east, so they would call Jesus King of the Jews. The Jews would have called him the Messiah. They would have called him the Anointed One, which meant that he was from the tribe and lineage of David, and it meant that he should sit on the throne of David. But the Magi, called Jesus the King of the Jews. Now, it's appropriate for non-Jews, and that name is not going to appear again in the book of Matthew until the Romans crucified Jesus. Again, non-Jewish people calling him King of the Jews. Not a word that we want to associate lightly with Jesus. The world is being affected and changed by the birth of this king. The king has come, and they understood that, and they understood that something very significant was happening. They weren't sure what it was yet. They did not have an accurate knowledge of who this Messiah was going to be. And so they called him King of the Jews. As we start our journey, we get rerouted along the way. The Magi followed his star, and they came to worship. It's interesting that there are two theories about this star. One is that it was a natural phenomenon And there are some very interesting expositions of it being a natural phenomenon. But I found it interesting that it's called his star and not a star. This is from Jesus. Travel directions from the star don't come from where they saw it in the east. They come from the fact that it was associated with the Messiah. And to me, that intimates that this is more of a supernatural phenomenon than just a natural thing. And they followed his star, the star that marked the birth of the Messiah. And they came to worship. This is another interesting thing about how God takes us along on journeys. The word for worship can mean either respect or worshiping deity, and all phrases in between. So you can respect somebody that you don't worship. You can respect a person even though you don't worship him. And so we have to ask the question, where are the Magi in the process of going from respect to worshiping deity? In Matthew, we have sort of an ambiguity here. That's a big word. I shouldn't say it very often. In the beginning parts of Matthew, when Matthew uses this word for worship, it means more respect in chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. But later on in the book, it comes to mean worshiping deity. Chapter 14, chapter 28. Matthew is leading us from the place of respecting Jesus to the place where we worship Jesus. He's starting out with the Magi, who knows, respecting Jesus, knowing something about him, but maybe they weren't worshiping yet. But still, God is taking us on a journey, that we probably can't figure out how he's going to lead us. All worthwhile responses to Jesus are on their way to worship. If they're respecting Jesus and not ending up with worship, then this is not a worthwhile response to our Lord and Savior. This is nice, but it's not worth anything. There are a lot of people in this world who respect Jesus as a teacher, but they're not going to worship him. They're not on their way to worship. We need to be the kind of people that, yes, we respect Jesus, and we are on our way to worshiping him. Or we have arrived at worshiping him. We have learned things about Jesus all the time. Matthew doesn't feel the need to identify how far along these people have traveled. He doesn't say that the Magi knew this about Jesus and this about Jesus, but they don't know this and this and this. He's just saying they have started this journey. And this journey is going to lead them places where they didn't know. It's going to lead them places along ways that aren't planned in their lives. And the same is true with us. He doesn't say how we fit into this story, about where our faith is. Are we still in the respect stage and working our way to worship? Or we've been worshiping God for a while? He's just saying we're all in this journey, and we're progressing in our understanding of Jesus Christ and worshiping for who he is. And taking another way home, we start with understanding very little and have to progress all the way to worship. This is where God wants us to be, worshiping his Son, Jesus Christ, for being the Savior of the world. Other people in participating with us on this journey begin at various points, and we help them along. And their journeys are going to be different as well. And we have to accept that as they progress in life and progress in their understanding of who Christ is. And so we bring all of these people along with us as we point them to Jesus. There are others who are going to be influenced by what happens to us as well. We want to influence the Magi to follow Jesus, to worship him as Jesus Christ, as Mary and Joseph did, but there are other people who are not going to respond very well. And so we come to Herod the king. And when he had heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. There's a whole other group of people who are going to be influenced by us that are not going to respond well to what God has to say. The report of a royal birth disturbs Herod because he has plans of his own. First he plans to live forever, but he also plans to bring in somebody who will carry on his legacy and proclaim his name over all the earth and say, oh, what a great guy he is for a long time. He wants to be known for a long time, and so he's planning his legacy. Well, this Jesus character, this Messiah being born in Bethlehem, has no part in that. And Herod is disturbed by what he hears. Now, what is also interesting is that the entire city is on edge as well. Well, what do they care about who's going to succeed Herod? I mean, why would that disturb them? Well, I think Matthew puts this in here because he is looking forward to the day 33 years from then or so when the whole town would be disturbed and rise up and cry, "Crucify him." They are not going to accept Jesus as well. And they are going to respond badly to what Jesus has to say. And I think that he mentions they're disturbing now because he's looking forward to the end of the story. The priests and the scribes know where the Messiah is to be born. Herod's asked, where is he supposed to be born? They say, oh, he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. But they don't do anything. How's that for a nice response? Here are the religious leaders of the day. Their Messiah is being born, the person that they've been waiting for 1,000 years to come into their lives, to save them, and they do nothing. They know lots of stuff, but they do nothing. This, I think, is another response of people that we run into. They're not on their way from respect to worship. They are on their way from knowledge to nothing. They're doing nothing about what they know. And this is a tragedy. We need to help people go from respect to worship, and doing nothing is as bad as what Herod did. Later on, when they participate in anger towards Jesus, when they're going to crucify him, I think their current knowledge, that they knew lots of stuff about Jesus. They knew that he was supposed to be born in Bethlehem. They knew all of this stuff, and yet they crucified Jesus. Makes their culpability, makes their choice at the end of the story that much more evil. If they had known nothing, if they had no inkling of what Jesus Christ was supposed to do or where he was supposed to be born or what was supposed to happen, well, you can sort of excuse their what they did because they were ignorant. But they know stuff. They know about the Messiah, and they did nothing, and then at the end of the story, they choose to kill him. Their choices are very much evil. Well, then Matthew quotes, he doesn't really quote Micah chapter 5. He says, "O Bethlehem and Judah, from you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people Israel." This is a very loose quotation at best. Matthew changes a lot of the words in his quotation. He quotes scripture like I do. Just kind of fuzzy. He starts off with Micah, Bethlehem. He changes it from Ephrathah to Judah. I think he does that because he wants people to be associated with Judah. And he ends by quoting 2 Samuel chapter 5, where he talks about a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And he ends with Israel, which is really quite interesting. Because the Israelites, the 10 tribes that were normally called Israel, have disappeared into the void, have disappeared into history and aren't anywhere to be seen. This child's birth would not only affect Judah, but with the entire nation, wherever they were going to be affected by this. And Matthew is not only saying that the baby would be born in Bethlehem, but that the whole world would be changed by what was going on. Well, then Herod summons the wise men secretly. Well, secrecy here is ominous. It's like hearing creaking upstairs, in a horror movie. Something bad's going to happen. Actually, when you just go to a horror movie, something bad is going to happen. The reader is set to wonder what Herod plans to do with the timing. Why does he have to be secret about this? Why is he saying, I want to worship him secretly? We get this horrible feeling. We know how it ends, but we get this horrible feeling right here that bad things are going to happen. The need to search or inquire is preempted, though. The Magi don't need to search and inquire. That's what Herod is telling them to do, because the star now begins to guide them. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Again, we have that word worship. Where are they on their progress? I think they're advancing. They first came to see the king, and now they're saying, oh, this is a little bit more than we had thought. I don't know where they are in the journey, but I think they're on their way. And then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Gifts fit for a king. Gifts to honor a king. Now, according to Isaiah chapter 60, verse 6, the desire of nations, which sometimes we've interpreted as being Jesus, would be brought into Jerusalem and given to God. Well, a lot of the commentators today are saying the desire of nation is gold and frankincense and myrrh. And what Isaiah is saying is that the nations will bring them their wealth. And it seems to be a fulfillment of that prophecy when they are bringing all of these things to Jesus. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Again, God is sending us down different paths than we expected. Sent them down a different path, sent us down a different path, and is sending Herod down a different path as well than he expected. We go home by another way. The Magi may not be the first Gentile believers. I think they were. But it doesn't really say whether they became believers or not. But they are a foreshadowing that God is bringing people from all over the world to follow after Jesus Christ. Matthew is going to go on to quote Jesus at the end of the book by saying, go into all the world and preach the gospel. People from everywhere would come to know Jesus Christ. And these wise men are the first to do that. Or at least they foreshadow the rest of us doing that. I'd like to draw two conclusions from our study today. The first is that what happens to us on our way home affects a lot of different people. God is bringing us home, and he often sends us down various paths in this life, and those paths affect a lot of folks. We travel by so many different routes to get home that we run into all kinds of people as God directs us down those paths. He wants us to understand that those people that we meet along the way are important to our journey and important to their journeys as well. Some seem pleasant enough, and some others are pretty rough. You know, we might meet up with some Magi who are very willing to listen to us, or very willing to accept the message that we bring, but then we find others that are not. Our journeys through this life are meant to affect other people. But God uses these routes to impact the world around us. And those journeys that we take, whether it's through sickness, whether it's through death, whether it's through joblessness, or whether it's through good times, God wants us to encounter the people around us. We are not the only center of the universe. I coined this phrase, and you can use it. You are not the only center of the universe. God thinks about you an amazing amount. You are the center of his thoughts. And that is just impressive to me, because just to think that God thinks about me at all, you know, on this little spiral arm of the galaxy, and not a very big galaxy at that, you know, that he thinks about me. I think we are the center of his universe. You are the center of his universe. He cares about you. If you were the only one who had ever lived, he would have sent his son to die for you. You are the center, but you're not the only center. He thinks about all of us the same way. He cares about all of us. And so he sends us down these various paths that we have in life. Through the valley of the shadow of death, or through sickness, or through joblessness, or through family struggles, or whatever it might be. Because he has other people that he wants to impact. He has other people that he wants us to affect as well. And we need, whether we run into Magi or whether we run into Herod, we are here as part of their story as well. As he's leading us home, he is leading other people along journeys as well. Our troubles and joys not only affect us, but all those people around us. And we have to understand that in the things that happen to us. Are we affecting them for good or for ill on our way home? We have to understand that. I had an interesting night last night in my dreams. Oh, I did. I dreamt about a guy who got beheaded. I dreamt about the space shuttle crashing in my backyard. Made a big mess. Let's see. I dreamt about, the worst one was that I had to do a camp that I was unprepared for. That was horrible. And, I dreamt an alligator attacked me. Typical night in my dreams. I mention this because in one of my dreams, most of the dream was in color, but part of it was, the horrible part was in black and white. Most people evidently dream in black and white. Have you ever thought about this? Do you dream in black and white? Some people dream in color. And still other people can affect what happens in their dreams. So, they can beat up the alligator, or they can stop the alligator, or they can choose to make the alligator run away. All I can do is wake up and go, oh man, that alligator was scary. That camp. No, not a camp. I was thinking about that in relationship to how we treat other people. I think most of the non-Christian world thinks in black and white. They don't understand the God colors of this world. They don't understand what God is doing and the vibrancy that is going on around them. All they see is dreariness and plainness and sameness and dullness. We can introduce them to those God colors. We can introduce them to a world that is impacted by the beauty that God gives it, that impacts it by the purpose that God gives it. And we can introduce them to dreams that are in color. But I also think that Christians, while I believe in the sovereignty of God, we also affect this world. And we're not just puppets who have to live through strange and horrible dreams. We can affect what's going on in this world. And we can introduce people to Christ. We can affect their lives through our prayers, through our actions, through our witness. We can change the things around us. It's not just a dream that you have to put up with and hopefully you can wake up from. We can change this world. We can affect the people around us. The second point I think that I want to make is much more personal. Jesus came into our world to provide us a way home. And it's going to be by another way. This coming year, we may have planned what we're going to do. We may hope that this world just continues on the way that we think it's always continued on. But Jesus takes us by another way. He's going to do things that we don't expect or think about. Some of us, as God helps us provide a way home, are going to react to that way like Herod did. We're going to react to it with anger, with disbelief, with violence, with pretense. We're going to react to God providing us a way home badly, like Herod. Some of us are going to react like the Magi. We're going to say, God has plans for me. He's going to introduce me to amazing things. Even though I'm going to be sent home by another way, and I don't understand that, it's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. God is going to bring us home. Some of us will react like the Magi did. My questions to this morning are you going to pretend to worship him like Herod? Are you going to sit there in the pews all year long going, I don't like what God's doing to me, I hate what God's doing to me, but I'm going to sit here and pretend like I want to worship him? Or are you going to start your journey today? Have you ever said to God, yeah, I'm willing to take this journey with you? Whether you send me down easy paths or send me by another way than I had ever planned or think, I'm going to take this journey with you. Now, whenever a preacher asks me this, I always felt very guilty and said, well, am I really a Christian now? Or am I really, have I really started believing? So I'm going to ask a third question. Are you going to be continuing on the journey that you've been walking on for a while now, on your way to love and worship? Where is this journey going to take you as God leads us on another way home? If you're on your way home, let's stand and sing hymn number 190.